They said it would be different. They said everything would change. Well, it turns out they were right. How do I know? Because they is me. This is how it feels to be 1 year out.
Hey y'all, my name is Kirk, and today I'm going to talk about 5 big things I've noticed after a year of living out as non-binary. Things that have changed, things I thought would change but didn't, and my expectations for the future. But first, a little life update. I got married, y'all. Don't know what that sound is. Marion and I got married at the end of July. It took over a year of planning, replanning, dealing with familial expectations, and just a stupid amount of emails. But it came out great. One of the hard parts about putting all of that together was making sure everything was right between us and our families. And for us, that meant coming out to each set of parents. We did, and it went about as well as either of us could have expected. After that, Marion and I made sure to repeatedly remind the wedding party, the coordinator, the vendors about people's pronouns and to use gender-inclusive terminology. Doing that, going through all of the effort and annoyance that it took to make sure that that happened, made me realize that one of the biggest changes for me this past year has been my relationship with pronouns. I remember the day I decided to start using they, them. Before that, I had no clear boundaries. I would tell people to use he, she, they, whatever felt right in the moment, which meant that basically everybody still called me he. Switching to they, them was exhilarating, and it still feels so life-affirming to ask people to recognize me for who I am. But making that decision didn't change me overnight. The first few months of being out as non-binary, I struggled with doubt and imposter syndrome. My brain would say, are you really non-binary or are you just faking it? Real non-binary people feel way worse when they're misgendered, and on and on and on. It took hearing other non-binary people talk about feeling the same to make me realize that I wasn't alone and that it's normal to feel that way. After a few months, those kinds of thoughts died down. It's almost like they were the growing pains of being out and trans. Now, after a year, I don't feel ambiguous at all about my pronouns, and it feels instinctively wrong to be referred to as he or him. That instinct came from time living in this body and from actively unlearning what decades of binary thinking have taught me. But time is the essential ingredient. Knowing something to be true is not the same as understanding it deeply, innately, in the core of your being. That takes time. That said, there was something that changed virtually overnight after I came out, and that is how I see men. It's weird. For all my life, I thought I was a man, or I should be one. Either way, I counted myself as one of them. Even when I realized I was gender fluid, I still basically saw myself as a gender fluid man. Coming out as non-binary forced me to recognize that I am not a man. Pretty much the day after I came out, I noticed I no longer thought of men as us, but them. All of a sudden, I wasn't a quote-unquote defective man. I was a completely effective, non-binary person, and it felt great. Seeing men as other somehow flipped a switch in my brain that allowed me to understand and identify their behavior as a group. I don't know if you guys have heard this before, so please comment how brave I am for saying it, but men are trash. There's this thing people do in New York where they will just stand in the absolute center of a stairwell in a crowded subway station, forcing people coming up and people coming down to worm and wedge their way around this person who could not have chosen a worse place and time to respond to a text. I used to see these people and think, wow, what a fucking asshole. But now I think, a man being a man. Taking up space inappropriately, causing problems in public for no reason, and just in general, treating the world like it belongs to you.
These are a few of my favorite things.
Haha, men are the worst, but I only understood how the worst they were after I realized I wasn't one of them. All people, but especially men, and especially white men, tend to view themselves as individuals who act as individuals, as opposed to people whose membership in a group informs their actions. So that's why men often do the things we're talking about when we say men are trash without realizing it, because they don't see themselves as men, they see themselves as people who are one of the good guys. When I took myself out of the category of men, it made it incredibly clear to me the ways in which our concept of masculinity directly affects men and their actions. And that's what prompted my own reckoning with internalized masculinity. So again, I am not a man, and I guess I never was, but that's not what this video is about. Regardless of the ways in which identities are formed, I was raised as a boy who would become a man. I was taught that I was male, and because of that, I internalized ideas about men and masculinity and applied those ideas to myself in ways that are inevitably harmful because of the violence inherent in how we depict masculinity. There's this idea you see a lot in the great works of fiction, like Ocarina of Time, where the protagonist has to confront their shadow side and not necessarily destroy it, but understand it and integrate it into the wholeness of who they are. That's kind of what this past year has felt like to me. Like, living openly as a non-binary person has pulled all of my worst subconscious, hateful, insecure, masculine impulses to the surface, where if I'm not careful, they manifest, and I do end up acting kind of like a man. Talking over people, taking up space, and just acting in that self-centered way that men sometimes do. Those behaviors aren't inherent to anyone, they're learned. And they're learned regardless of whether you want to learn them or not. That's what socialization is. The reason I bring this up is because my identity doesn't absolve me, and your identity doesn't absolve you of behaviors we think fall outside of those identities. Even though this does apply to capital E everyone, I do want to specifically address my fellow AMAB non-binary people here because I think we are especially prone to overlooking our own bad behavior. Fact is, we have internalized really bad ideas about how to be, and that doesn't just go away once we realize we're non-binary. You have to work at it. That means checking in with yourself, it means being on the lookout for harmful behavior, and it means taking responsibility, apologizing, and making amends when the situation calls for it. It's not gonna happen overnight, but the way I see it is, it's okay to be a work in progress, as long as you do the work. That was a little intense. Let's watch 10 seconds of my cats being cute to unwind. When I had just come out, I was obsessed with dresses. It seemed like a necessity to wear a dress every chance I could in order to showcase my newfound transness. After a while though, I felt like dresses just weren't enough. I wanted more. If you've seen my video dressing as an AMAB non-binary person, you know what I mean. Basically, wearing dresses doesn't make me feel like I look non-binary because people will either read you as a man in a dress or as a trans woman, and neither of those is right? But honestly, I was desperate. I felt like wearing a dress was my ace in the hole for being read at least as queer, and I so badly wanted to be read as queer. There was one instance where I was going to one of Marion's work parties, and I had ordered this really dope red velvet dress to wear to it. The dress came, I tried it on, and it was basically a t-shirt on me, totally unwearable as a dress. I didn't have anything else to wear, so I ended up going in something that was pretty masculine. And I had to be okay with that. I had to be okay with maybe not being read as queer or non-binary. Submitting to my own inability to control other people's perception of me was a huge turning point in terms of how I feel about my own presentation. Even now, even the past couple of months, I feel so much more secure in how I present, no matter what I'm wearing. And I attribute that to having time to try on different outfits, but also to just more viscerally feeling the fact that I am non-binary. I am non-binary from the inside out, and that is a result of my transition. The word transition is most commonly associated with binary trans people whose appearance changes over years of living out as whatever gender they are, sometimes but not always as a result of taking hormones. But just because non-binary people's appearance doesn't change from apparently a man to distinctly identifiable as a woman or vice versa, doesn't mean we don't also experience a transition. For those of you taking notes at home, yes, this episode has a theme, and that theme is things take time. You don't have to be on hormones to experience a period of transition, and pretending like non-binary people don't transition just sets us up to feel bad about ourselves for not feeling the things people think we should. I wouldn't know what else to call what I'm going through except my transition, and now I have said the word transition so many times, I'm not sure it's actually a word. Transition. 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 Life is change. Everything changes all the time. But that is trite and overly general, so let me be specific. All our lives, we have these ideas about ourselves. We're told certain things, reprimanded for behaving in non-conforming ways, and bullied or left out when we continue to act in ways that are dissonant to other people's expectations of us. Our minds and bodies subconsciously take all this information and add it into the complex calculation of who we are and how we're supposed to be. All these thoughts are wrapped around us layer after layer, making us into the people the world can accept. For some people, everything they hear about themselves matches up, or is close enough to how they feel that they don't question it. But other people just never feel right. The shapes the world draws for them aren't the shape they actually are. They don't fit within the lines at all, and can't tolerate a life where they pretend that they do. But knowing what you're not is not the same thing as understanding who you are. The ideas of the world are still there, wrapped around you, and are constantly added to and reinforced by the things we see and hear every single day. It's not a shell to be cracked and discarded. It's the continuous creation, recreation, and renewal of yourself as you really are, despite the world's objections. This past year has been wild. I feel like I've finally started to ask for the things that I really want out of life and not just hope that they'll come to me. You know, I have been less willing to diminish myself in the name of compromise, been less willing to accept any kind of mistreatment. I have more self-love and self-respect than I've had at any point in my life. And I know that's because I've been honest with myself and honest with the world about who I really am. I also know that I couldn't have gotten here without the love and support I get from my friends and my family, and especially from my partner, Marion. She's always seen me. She's always seen me. So that's where I'm at, 1 year out. Things have changed, things are still changing. No idea what this next year is gonna bring, and I'm super excited to find out. So yeah, that's all I got. Love you guys, and see you next time. Read a book, you nerds.